Good afternoon, everybody. The March 30th, 2009 special joint meeting of the City Council and Redevelopment Agency is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers. The special meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, can be viewed on the internet at www.lasvegasnevada.gov. The proceedings will be rebroadcast Thursday at 8 a.m., on Friday at 2 p.m., Saturday at 5 a.m., and the following Monday at 10 p.m. As you all know, this council chamber has a very sophisticated fire detection and suppression sprinkler system, so should alarms activate, please leave the building. We'll have our marshals outside to tell you when it's safe to return. This is a cautionary instruction that I give each and every time that we meet here. So before we move on our agenda, would everyone please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 4 is discussion and possible action regarding the fiscal year 2010 City of Las Vegas and Redevelopment Agency operating and capital project budget requests. Ms. Fretwell.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the Council. Today is the first in what will probably be a series of discussions regarding your fiscal year 10 budget. And I thought it would be helpful maybe to go over a few things about where we've been leading into this discussion this afternoon. One, I really feel like that our fiscal efforts over the last 18 to 24 months have been working well for us. I know many of you have asked me as we've been in briefings over the last month or so, why is it, Betsy, that we're kind of in this position? And I think it's because we took early action in creating savings and making needed cuts to help us stabilize our budget situation, despite the tumultuous condition of the national economy, and I guess to some degree the global economy. So I think we've been well positioned by the things that you've instructed us to do through your direction in a variety of budget workshops over the last 18 to 24 months. We've cut close to $50 million out of our budget over the course of that last 18 months. That's not insignificant when you look at them in total. We've implemented well over 50% of our fundamental service review recommendations that we presented to you back in October. That's not insignificant either. And now we're starting to take on some of the more difficult organizational changes that are part of those 106 recommendations. Our most recent organizational change was to consolidate our graphic arts and public information offices together, bring everyone into a centralized direction under our communications director, David Riggleman. And just by making that change alone, we're able to save $500,000 without one impact to a job, one employed person for the city. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to continue to do. We successfully implemented the voluntary separation program. We're going to go into the details of the success of that program a little bit later, but that helped us save $6 million next year, and we paid for the entire program this year. So it's a real good example, I think, of how being creative and innovative can help us save jobs, sustain our services, and maintain our fiscal integrity. And when I go out and I meet with our employees, those are the three things that I'm telling them that we are focused on right now: maintaining our fiscal integrity, sustaining our services to this community, and preserving jobs, because there is work to be done in the city. We just need to make sure that we have the employees in the right seats to be able to get those jobs done. So we're working with those three key issues in mind. We also created the stabilization fund. You funded that at the last budget meeting. That preserves our fiscal integrity going forward. That is our savings account, if you will, for us to be able to ride out future bumps in the road. And it's a critical piece of our long-term fiscal strategy that we're going to be presenting to you today. Today we're going to spend a little more time talking about our financial situation, but we're bringing to you a draft budget of about $540 million. There's probably going to be some direction here today that may change that, and over the course of the next 6 weeks before we finalize the budget. But it is basically a flat budget from 2 years ago. So we're kind of holding our own, despite the growth in costs of doing business. So we're trying to manage those costs despite our reduction in revenues coming into the city. How are we doing that? With that $540 million budget, we are strategically reducing our ending fund balance. We're consciously saying we need to drop that down next year. We are also restoring some critical services. You indicated last fall that there were some areas that you felt were really struggling, code enforcement being one of those, some of our field maintenance being another part of that, making sure that our assets are well managed. So we are trying to strategically keep those positions filled so that we can continue to sustain those services to our community. We are also recommending some limited funding of new capital projects. Most of those are coming from resources that are dedicated funding sources. So there's not a tremendous amount of flexibility in how we fund those capital projects, but we do think that it's important for us to continue these projects that have been in the works for years. Many of them have been on plans for years, and we need to keep them moving. Many of them have been designed, some of them are partially funded. We're recommending that we continue to push that. As you've heard me say before, we can't spend our way out of this and we can't save our way out of this. This is a balancing act. So we bring to you today what we think is a balancing act of all of those different components. All of our concerted efforts have positioned us well for next year. I don't think there's too many city administrators that are going to be standing up telling their council that this year. But we are well positioned, and I think you all should be very proud of that. But for your direction and your guidance, the commitment and leadership of your executive team, your department heads, have done some serious heavy lifting over the last 18 months. And they have come up with creative ways to continue to provide top-notch service to this community. And I'm very proud of them for that, and thankful to them for being willing to stretch the boundaries a little bit and look at things differently and do things in a different way, maybe a little bit more cost-effectively than before, and just differently, that has been able to create some savings for us over time. And I have to say, hats off to our employees. But for their willingness to be a part of this solution, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be able to say we bought ourselves another year. And that's what we're able to say today, that we bought ourselves some time. As we look forward, and granted, it's Mark's crystal ball that he's looking into, and sometimes we joke about it being slightly cloudy. But as we look forward, we still have some things that we need to address financially. And they're not going to be easy for this organization or for our community. But I think we're prepared for that, and we have time to do it well and to do it right and to recognize the impacts of this next wave of work that we're going to have to do to make sure that our costs and our revenues line up better than they have for the last couple of years. So that's what we plan on talking a little bit about today with you. Mark and I will be going over jointly the current fiscal situation, how we're doing and implementing Performance Plus, which you all know we're using as we make recommendations for budgets, for service enhancements, service reductions. We're using all of that data in our meetings on a regular basis so that we can better tell you the impact of any changes that we make. We'll be presenting the draft fiscal year 10 budget, including capital projects, and we'll also go over the redevelopment agency budget as we project it for next year. So unless there are questions for me, Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to Mark and have him start the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Fretwell now? All right, Mr. Vincent.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Betsy. For the record, Mark Vincent, Acting Deputy City Manager. Our informal agenda today, as Betsy pointed out, we're going to talk a little bit about Performance Plus. I'll give you also a little revenue update. We'll remind you what we have already done with the stabilization fund, and we'll go into the general fund and what those issues are there that we've been talking about. Betsy will help me when we get into that, when we talk about some of our staffing levels and decisions we've made. We'll also give you a quick recap of the Capital Project Fund, the RDA Fund, and then a reminder of what our schedule is. Let me talk a little bit about Performance Plus. Where we are today is that all departments have written and developed a strategic business plan that includes in it identification of service deliveries that they have, as well as some measurements that they are doing in order to determine how well they are performing as a department or as a program. We call that the family of measures. They have certainly input and output measures, efficiency measures, but probably the most important measure they have is a key results measures. All the departments are currently participating in our quarterly reports, which is a positive thing, but there are some things that we still need to do, and I'd like to go through that a little bit.
Excuse me, what was PPET?
I'm sorry. I'll do better at catching these. It's Performance Plus Executive Team. It's the executive team that the individual departments and their program managers report out to, and so it's a pretty high level process, and that's one of the things that we want to talk to you about today. P Plus, Performance Plus. Mary, that was a segue into that first item. One of the things that we've noticed is some departments are really doing a very good job at driving down Performance Plus down into the lower levels to the line folks, and they in fact are having sort of mini PPET. We call them Performance Plus executive team. We call it PPET. Little mini PPET meetings, and we've begun to talk about the need to drive that down further. That all employees from the bottom up need to be involved in this process, because we think it's critical to how we were going to be operating in the future. So we've got a deadline in April to come back with some recommendations. In fact, we have a retreat later this week to begin talking about that with the other departments. While we don't necessarily have a performance evaluation plan that addresses Performance Plus expressly, we are looking at ways of being able to use Performance Plus in helping us evaluate and use that performance as a reason for the ratings that we give, and we've begun doing some of that as well. And we have a target date of May 2009 to provide a little more guidance on that. A big issue that we've had that relates to several items on this list is just your charging practice policy. This is a policy that defines how you fill out your time card and what you charge your time to and what a cost objective is and all the things that people need to know when they fill out a time card or fill out a purchase requisition. And frankly, we've been a little lacking in that area, and there's a little bit of confusion. And if there's one weak area that we have, it's in all of Performance Plus, it's our efficiency measures, because we're still not measuring cost information accurately because of the confusion on charging practices. So we need to come back here in June with the charging practice policy to clarify that and provide a little better guidance. We're targeting late summer, early fall to have another strategic workshop with you all. One of the things that's happened, and it's not certainly a mistake in my mind, but it was sort of by design. We've been focusing very hard on the operational side of Performance Plus. We've been trying to make sure that departments recognize that this is something that we expect them to use in the day-to-day operations and become a way of life. We've kind of neglected a little bit on purpose how the performance measures at the operational level roll up to your priorities. We have, in fact, aligned our programs with your 8 priorities, but we kind of have a little disconnect. And part of that's because the measures that we have at the line of business or program level are fairly low measures, and they don't necessarily on their own roll up to something that's meaningful to you all as an executive board or to the public for that matter. And so we know that we have this requirement that we've got to figure out how we're going to begin to report both to you and to our citizens on a more routine basis with things that we have historically called key performance indicators, which are not necessarily a measure of performance, but a measure of the results of the things that we're trying to do. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but we need to make sure that we are rolling our measures into key performance indicators and aligning those appropriately with your priorities. And it may very well be that when we have the retreat later this year, some of those priorities may need to be rethought. There may be some issues. When you start trying to identify key performance indicators on some of these priorities, it's going to be a little bit difficult, and maybe that's because we don't have the priority just right yet. So we might have some discussion about that. But for the vast majority of the priorities, I think things are pretty well aligned. Data collection is an issue for us, trying to automate that, and we're targeting December for that. And then the cross-cutting issues, we haven't quite dealt with those yet. And the issue that Betsy brought up about the PIO and graphic arts is a classic example of something that practically half the departments had a PIO or graphic artist, and trying to consolidate those into one central function because it makes sense from an economy and efficiencies and a scale size made some sense to us. And one of the things that Performance Plus has done for us is in the strategic planning process and the business plans, these things pop up. You can see them. They become very obvious. How to fix them and how to deal with them is another issue. But the idea of trying to deal with functions and activities that cross multiple departments is something we still haven't got our arms quite around yet, and so we've got some work to do there. Just by way of giving some kudos for some of the things we've done, this is not obviously the complete list. Betsy mentioned, again, the PIO graphic artist saving us about $500,000 on the negotiated procurements. We have been measuring the results of the function of negotiating and buying goods and services. And we have been trying to measure what we're saving in terms of negotiations now. Some of the things we do, sometimes a supplier will respond to a bid quote or to an RFP, and they'll submit a proposal with some assumed pricing. We question the pricing, even if it's the lowest submitted proposal, or the proposal that we have selected over others. We still go in and negotiate those because there are always things that we can look at, be it pricing, be it assumptions about the scope of work, overhead costs, materials costs, and in the process of having a trained buyer or contract specialist negotiate those, we are saving money. And through the first 6 months of this year, we've saved $1.2 million from the efforts of that. And again, what happened was, as we were measuring it, we weren't necessarily getting the results we were expecting, and we realized that we had a training issue perhaps and a communication issue, and so we worked through that first, and now we're seeing the results that we expected. Vehicle useful lives is an interesting issue. Historically, we have identified a useful life for a vehicle. When the vehicle hit that useful life, we have either retired it, replaced it. As a result of some of the things that we were doing through our fundamental service review, we began looking at focusing on mileage on the vehicle as opposed to perhaps its life, looking at underutilized vehicles and establishing a policy that says we're not going to just automatically replace an underutilized vehicle. We're going to make sure that it gets deployed where it needs to go. And so we expect that'll save us about $1 million. Previous meetings, we talked about the K-9 unit. The issue here was measuring the cost of deployment to a park or to a city facility. And when we started looking at measuring the cost effectiveness of these different ways of responding, we determined that the K-9 patrol could be sometimes 10 times the cost of deploying a regular marshal. So that was what gave the impetus there to saying maybe we should rethink the K-9 process. Expenditure per bus rider is another area that we were looking at, cost per ridership. And we find that our cost per ridership is 4 times. In other words, we're subsidizing 3/4 of the bus program. And so, although we haven't implemented this particular thing yet, we are working very diligently with the Regional Transportation Commission to see if they would be interested, and I think they are interested in the buses, and we're trying to work out a program where they can also perhaps take on our bus drivers either through their contractor, and we hope that that will bear us this fruit of saving us about $800,000 a year. And then finally, reduction of P-card transactions. Just measuring P-card transactions, it's interesting when you start measuring things. We realize that perhaps a little better training, perhaps with elimination of P-cards that perhaps were unnecessary, we're able to save about $600,000 a year by better managing our P-card transactions. And again, that was a result of measurements that we were taking. So that's just sort of an example of what Performance Plus is doing on an operational level. Now we've got to start bringing this up to a higher level, and that's what we'll be working on for the next year or so. Just as a reminder, on the Revenue Stabilization Fund last week, as Betsy mentioned, we created the Stabilization Fund. Gosh, I can't remember if it was January or it was a couple months ago. I had the date written down and I've forgotten it. Last week, we actually funded it, and this is how we funded it. The only change we made from the original idea was that we were able to take some fund balance that was larger than we anticipated we'd have when we started this fiscal year 2009, as well as some of the savings we've had to make up for some funding from the Fire Safety Initiative that you'll see a little later on we're going to designate to go towards Station 107. The reason why we did that is we wanted to fund the maximum we could fund in this Revenue Stabilization Fund, and that's 10% of the prior year's expenditures, which were $505 million. So that's why we're capped at 50.5. So that's what we're doing here.
Your Honor,
Yes.
while you're talking about that right now, make it clear to the public what that stabilization fund is for, if that's all right.
Thank you, Councilman. The purpose here is that we're not out of the woods yet. We've been pretty proactive. We got on it early, but the reality is this is going to be a long recession. And you'll see a little later on that the fund balance that we have in addition to this $50 million is going to be needed, and we are going to be drawing down both our fund balance and these resources over the next 4 years or so. And so this is to help us get through a difficult time. What we were trying to do, and I think some of what you're seeing today, if not here locally, certainly in other cities, is by delaying action, you have to overreact. And if you recall when we met last October, one of my admonitions to you was the sooner we act, the smaller the pain will be, because if you wait and delay, the pain just becomes bigger. The compounding of our costs and our labor costs just make it worse. And so we didn't want to overreact. And I could sit here today and tell you we need to cut another $30 million out of the budget to balance it for 2010, but the reality is, because of our modeling and because of looking into the future, we know we can controllably pull down from our revenue stabilization and our general fund to get through the remainder of this recession and the beginning part of the recovery. And we think we can do that with this fund and with the fund balance. So that's the purpose of this. The purpose is we're creating this to help us get through what we see to be another 3-4 years of difficult times where our revenues are not going to keep pace with our expenditures. Thank you.
You want to tell us what those various...
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. I've done this so many times I'm forgetful. Capital Project Fund, CPF. We identified several projects that either were completed and their funds were available, or projects that we have either eliminated or deferred. And those were capital project funds that were originally funded with contributions from the general fund. And so that's what that $11.3 million represents. ISF is Internal Service Fund. We had $22 million in fund balances in various Internal Service Fund. Internal Service Fund, for all intents and purposes, really is part of the general government, part of the general fund, but we set them up as a recharge process so that you pay by the drink. If you have a computer, you pay for the computer. If you don't have a computer, you don't pay for it. If you have a vehicle, you pay for it. If you don't have a vehicle, you don't pay for it. And so those funds are driven based upon usage. And over the years, we have identified that we had healthy fund balances that were in excess of the needs, particularly since we were starting to elongate replacement cycles. If we're going to replace vehicles every 7 or 9 years as opposed to every 5, well, that produces a savings. And we can take that fund balance and use it in this manner here by helping us to create this revenue stabilization fund. Special revenue fund balances, we had several funds. The most common one that would come to mind would be the Las Vegas Convention and Visit Authority, which is money that we earmarked historically is for parks, construction, or maintenance. Historically, we've always put it to capital projects. In this case, we're trying to use that money to help with the maintenance of the parks facilities as opposed to for a capital project. And so by using it for the maintenance costs, we can then pull back the general fund money that would have gone for that into this fund, and so that's what that represents. And the general fund, as I mentioned, was just the fund balances and the cost savings for this year. So that's how we got to the $50.5 million. Hopefully that was helpful. Our economic assumptions in our modeling, this sounds kind of may not sound as interesting as it was to me, but from fiscal year 2007 to fiscal year 10, on an APR basis, an annual percentage rate basis, the revenues are flat. In other words, the revenues for 2010 are the same revenues that we had forecast, or actually had in fiscal year 2007. So 4 years later, we're back where we were 4 years ago, and that's significant, and just in itself.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes, Councilman.
Mr. Vincent, repeat what you just stated, but just break it down for me a little bit as far as explaining how that came about.
In fiscal year 2006, our actual revenues were $504.0 million. In 2010, we're forecasting $503.8 million. There's no growth there. Now, we obviously had growth. In 2007, we had 3.3% growth. Revenues went up to $520. The growth started dropping. We had 1.2% growth in 2008. That was $527 million.
Mark, I'm sorry. Councilwoman Tarkini and I are kind of off a little bit here. Do you have a slide depicting the information that you're sharing here? Is it in the book? I'm trying to follow you.
I don't think it was in your briefing handout.
Okay,
it's part of that,
but it's not a part of
the
presentation
like
here. Yes, I have that. Okay.
And so we had a little bit of growth in 2007, 2008, but then in 9 and 10, we've exhausted that growth. We're back to where we were back 4 years ago in 2006. So that's basically what that's telling you. The gist of it is, from my perspective, we're looking at a 3-year recession. This recession officially started in October of 2007, I believe. And so we're expecting that sometime in the middle of 2011, that's when we can start to expect to see revenues begin to grow. We're on a slide now, and as you'll see here in a little bit, they're declining. Unemployment's going to stay high. When we begin the recovery in 2011, we're anticipating that in 2013, 2014, somewhere around there, we'll expect revenues to come back to a modest but healthy revenue growth of 5 to 6%. They will certainly not be what they were, and the 10 years ended in the mid first decade.
Meaning double digits.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that's our assumptions. You've seen this chart before. It's color-coded by years. The bars represent quarters of growth rate. In other words, if you're looking at the first green bar is the growth rate over the revenue from the first quarter of 2000. And you can see from 2004 through 2007, we had some pretty phenomenal growth. In fact, we strung together, I think, 11 quarters there in a row where the growth rate for consolidated tax was over 10%. Now, C-tax, or consolidated tax, for those who don't know, is predominantly sales and use tax. About 84% of it is sales and use tax. Another 10% of it is probably government services tax, which used to be the motor vehicle privilege tax, which is the personal property tax you pay on your vehicle. And then the remainder is some other taxes for cigarettes and liquor and transfer tax. So it's predominantly sales tax, and it's very elastic, and as you can see, it responds very much to the economy. And you can see in 2007 was the first year that we actually had a negative growth in C-tax, and that was followed by 2008, which had a negative growth. And, of course, in 2009, we're right at about 9.6% negative growth for the year. We are forecasting for the year a 10% negative growth rate. That's what we're forecasting. So, again, we just don't think we've seen the bottom yet. In this particular graph for consolidated tax, the green bar represents dollars on the scale on the left, which is in millions. Those are in millions. And the red line represents the percentage growth rate, and it goes to the percent scale on the right. And the dashed blue line, the dotted blue line about in the middle of the page, that's 0% growth. So anytime the red line with the little diamonds drops below that blue line, you have negative growth. And so we will have 4 years in a row of negative consolidated tax growth. And you can see that when you look at the tops of the bar. We crested in 2006, and we've been sliding down ever since then. So we've been watching this for a while, and that's part of the reason why we're a little bit ahead of it, perhaps than others. Property tax, between consolidated tax and property tax, those two taxes probably make up 70 to 75% of our revenue. They're the ones that we depend upon the most. They're also the ones we have the least control over, ironically. And this is the same kind of a chart. Again, the green bars go to the left in millions of dollars, and the red dotted line goes to the percentages on the right. What's interesting about this is even with the advent of the property tax cap in FY05, we were still seeing healthy growth in the 8 to 10% range in 5, 6, and 7. And then you can see in 8, 9, and now in 10 how it's fallen off. And the reason for this is sort of depicted in the next slide. The green bar represents the same green bar of the previous slide, but the gold or yellow portion on top of it represents the portion of the tax bill that would have been abated because the individual parcel's tax bill grew faster than 3% if it's residential or 8% if it was commercial. And what's happened here is while we crested it, it's interesting, in 2008, FY08, and FY09, where the total tax bill, the total assessed value dropped, our revenues still increased by almost 6%. And that's because we were consuming or using up the tax abatement. When someone gets their tax bill, they get a bill that says, here's your property taxes for the full value, full assessed value, and then there's a column in the middle, which is the abatement. The last column is your tax bill based upon a 3% growth from the bill from the prior year. And that middle column, the abatement, is just the plug difference, if you will. And so those yellow bars represents the cumulative effect, parcel by parcel, of that abated portion. And you can see from 2009, 2010, we pretty much blew through the abatement. And actually, this was somewhat predicted by a report that Applied Analysis did for North Las Vegas about a year ago. I think at that time they said that maybe there's about 12 to 18 months of abatement left, and they were pretty much right. So this year, in 2010, because the taxes are not calculated on a gross basis in terms of the whole city, the abatement's calculated on a parcel-by-parcel basis. The impact of the individual parcels that had declining values and that went through all their abatement is going to bring our tax revenue down by about 4%. This is a pie chart we show every year. It shows the distribution of our overlapping property tax rate. The City of Las Vegas property tax rate is represented on the blue section, the dark blue section of the pie. You can see it's about 77 cents. That includes the 9.5 cents fire safety initiative override. And the reason why we show this chart is because a lot of people living in the City of Las Vegas think that when they pay their $3.27 tax rate, that the City of Las Vegas is getting all those taxes. And of course, it's not true. We have an overlapping tax rate, and many agencies in the Valley benefit from that tax. And as you can see from this chart, the biggest beneficiary really is the school district. But about half of that $1.30 per $100, that 39% yellow pie piece, half of that goes to operating revenues for the school district, and the other half goes to their capital program, their bonding program for the capital program. So that gives you a flavor for where those taxes go. By the way, we're not suggesting at this point any change in the property taxes, but I should have actually mentioned here. Theoretically, in the period of time where that yellow bar in this chart for the abatement was growing, even if the council elected to levy its full authorized levy, and when I say that, I think in the state of Nevada, the state of Nevada's capped levy for the city of Las Vegas is around 83, 84 cents, somewhere around there. And as you, our operating levy right now is 67, 65. So there's almost 20 cents, about 18 cents of tax rate that the council could impose if they wanted to, without a vote of the people, without any special action. Now it's been, I think, 12 years ago, or 11 years ago, we voluntarily rolled our operating tax rate down, and it's been at that rate ever since. So we made a conscious decision to roll it down, and there's a cushion there that we could impose taxes. I bring that up only because in 6, 7, 8, and even in 9, even if the council would have authorized an increase in the operating tax rate, it wouldn't have generated any revenue in those years because it would have been in excess of the 3% or 8% cap, and it would have been abated. Now in FY10, that's not necessarily the case. And so if you were, for example, to increase the operating levy by 3%, which is probably probably about 2 cents per $100, that would actually probably have a positive impact on the revenues. Of course, in this budget does not. We're not suggesting you do that. I'm just trying to educate you in terms of what the possibilities are. The last 4 years, that wasn't even a possibility. Today, it probably is.
Could you go to the pie again
Yes, sir.
and tell us what we get for the .6391 that we give to the county?
Pardon me, Mayor, say that again? What we get for
What
that?
do we get for the .6391 that we give to the county?
We get the county services. A lot of that is their court system. Certainly, it is the health and human services. Certainly, there's subsidy for things like UMC. You're basically getting county services for that. The services don't really overlap, and they have their own fire safety tax for their fire department. They also have their own township rates, which are not included in here. This is just this portion for the county, which is the red pie, that 20%. That is just for county-wide services that they have their own individual township levy, which would include for the city-like services they provide to those townships.
Do they have a similar pie?
Yes, they would. I don't know. It would be similar. It would be lower. It would be less than.
Do any county monies come to the city?
Only through interlocal agreements that we might have with them. I don't know. I can't. None popped in my mind. If we had any, they'd be pretty insignificant.
All right, thank you.
Your Honor.
Yes. Go.
If I may, too, and for either one of you to answer this question, this is illuminating, to say the least, for we as taxpayers to look at this pie chart to see how our tax dollars, or our property tax dollars, are separated. And I'm glad the mayor brought up what are we getting for our 20% to the county in this pie chart. What I want one of you to tell us and educate us and the public, what would it take to change this, the way this is cut up?
Well, what would it take? I won't answer that right away. Let me go give you some more background here, because I want to be really transparent here. I took some liberties in creating this pie chart, and so that you wouldn't have to see it's sliced up even smaller slices. And the county, the 6391, the tax rate that the mayor mentioned, there are certain pieces in there that actually are for specific county services. Indigent care, for example, is buried in there. And so I took some liberties in saying, well, that's all the county. If the county was sitting here, they'd say, well, that's not us. Those are taxes we get to provide services for state programs that they have delegated to us to do. So to be fair about that, I don't have those exact numbers, but I could get you those. Again, by the way of background, in the state Constitution has a $5 limit on your property tax. The property tax rate cannot be more than $5 per $100 assessed value. Back when we did the tax shift back in 1981, when we moved away from property taxes to sales and use taxes, one of the reasons that drove that, the biggest reason, of course, was Prop 13 in California. But the other reason that drove that is a lot of cities and local governments were already topped out at $5. They were already maxed out. And so what happened is by shifting on the supplemental city-county relief tax and the consolidated tax, the sales tax area, they statutorily dropped the cap on the overlapping tax rate to $3.64. So statutorily, all local governments now are capped at $3.64. And through functions like the Debt Management Committee, which Councilwoman Tarquini is on, every year they get a proposal or get a report from each local government saying, here's what our tax rates are, here are the bonds we intend to issue, here are the bonds that may or may not have impact on the tax rates, so that if there's any competition as we get closer and closer to 364, the Debt Management Committee can decide this bond project that is going to impact property taxes is more important than another bond project that will also impact taxes. In terms of how we can affect it, some of these taxes are, pieces of this are overrides, and voters have already approved a good chunk of these. As I mentioned, half of the 39%, half of the $1.30 it's about 65 cents of it, is going to the county, the Clark County School District bond program, which voters have already approved. So a good chunk of this is already going the direction that voters have already asked for it to go.
And, Your Honor, I think that's the answer I was looking for, is the voters have decided how this money gets cut up. And I wanted to make that clear.
Right, but I'm concerned, could the county, for instance, could they raise the .6391 heading upwards towards the 3.64?
Yes, they could,
And we would be responsible for paying that.
as we could too.
Well, your
Well-
taxpayers would be paying, the citizens
The
obviously
citizens,
would
yeah.
be paying more if the county raised the
Right, the city-
countywide property tax rate.
The Las Vegas citizens.
Right.
Right.
But it would be all of the, if they changed this rate, it would be one of these rates that Mark referenced.
Could the school district raise the rate?
They're set at
I think,
75.
yeah.
They're set at 75 cents. So their operating rate is set. They could raise the rate with voter-approved new debt.
Right. And there would be a lot of discussion if anybody decided to really change their rates. Councilwoman would be very busy on debt management because it would take quite a bit of effort to figure that out because there's only, like Mark said, our cap is around 83 cents, and it's because you can't move against that 364 and compromise other taxing districts in the process. So regionally, there's usually a large discussion if people start moving their rates significantly.
Thank you.
And oftentimes it benefits everyone more if it is actually the county than if North Las Vegas raised their rate.
Thank you.
And let me put my RDA hat on while we're talking about this pie chart. The issue here, people look at this and they say, okay, this is great, $1.30 or 75 cents of the $1.30 goes towards operating of the schools. And what most people don't understand is that when the state legislature fixes, they have the responsibility for funding the county school districts. That's their responsibility. The fact that the local school district has a tax levy is helpful, but it's not necessarily helpful to the county school district. It's helpful to the state. Because what happens is the state establishes a per pupil funding level, and that's what they fund. Now, if they get more or less property tax revenue, all that means is there's more or less for the state to make up out of its general fund. So that's why sometimes you hear us get into this discussion about, well, what's been the impact if these revenues, redevelopment tax revenues that were going towards redevelopment projects as opposed to schools, if the schools got them, the question you have to ask yourself, would the state change its per pupil funding? And if the answer is no, or not at the same level, then the state benefits from it, not the local schools. And that's one of the concerns, I suppose, that local folks would have about that.
Another way to look at it is if you look at this pie chart and you added the light blue 6% and the yellow 39% together, that basically is a state portion of property tax. The state gets 45% in effect of the property tax generated by the city of Las Vegas residents. And they have to use it to pay for education and other things, but basically the state gets 45% of all the property taxes raised in the city of Las Vegas.
Thank you. I forgot that.
Could I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
You said that 39% in yellow, which goes for the school district, and you said about half of that were the bonds that they had out.
My memory, I know that the school district operating rate is 75, so I think the balance, 65 cents, is what's going to the bond. To the
And
bond
that's the
program.
98 bond issue? That's the last bond issue they passed, as I recall?
Well, and whatever else they had outstanding as well. Because the way the tax rate would work is as long as they are still issuing the bonds on a revolving basis, they can maintain that level. But the tax will be set at whatever is necessary to service the debt, the principal and interest on that.
Is there any way we can check, or would it be too difficult, on some of the expenditures of those monies? And the reason why I ask is because I was a member of the trustees for the school district when this bond issue was passed. I was there when we set up the rules and the parameters of it. And we spent many hours to ensure that the older districts with the older schools would receive monies for refurbishment and so forth and so on. And I've been very concerned lately in that when we're told they don't have monies to help, for example, the pool at Garside, they did give $2 million to a covered pool in Henderson that wasn't even connected with a school. And they said it was bond issue money. And the public's broadcasting system, and I'm a strong supporter of that, but they got $30 million of bond money for their new building. And that was according to the newspaper from that 98 bond issue. And I'm just wondering, when these things come out, is there a way that we can check that they are really going where they're supposed to be going?
I am
Or is that
positive.
stepping on their toes too much? Excuse me.
Obviously it's a public record and that information is available, and we'll see what we can do to help
I
you
just know
to
there were
get that
very
information.
strict parameters at what percentage the newer schools would get for new buildings and what percentage the older ones would get. And when they're saying they don't have money now for some of the older schools which haven't been refurbished, it's a question mark to me. I just am trying to, I know in the older districts, 3, 5, and 1, that's a big question. And I'm not saying don't do the newer schools. They have been doing the newer schools. But when you talk about swimming pools in Henderson, and I know the school district operates there, but it's not connected with the pool, where they have their own parks and recreation funding, don't they, Betsy? Am I correct in that?
The city of Henderson does, yes.
Yeah, it's questionable to me that we were told they didn't have $1 million, and we had lined item $1 million that we were going to spend to refurbish that pool that's needed at Garside in an older district, a socioeconomic area that needs it. They didn't have it for that, and then $2 million went to the other. Then the question is, are they doing it out of interest that they got off the bond issue? But I would think the same division of percentage would hold for interest as well as the main part of the bond.
Well, I'll be happy to see what I can find out for
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor Goodman, may I please? The chart we have in front of us, the pie chart, applies to City of Las Vegas property tax payers, correct?
That's correct.
Is there a similar chart with the same exact type of distributions for county property owners?
The county would be a little bit different. It would not have, instead of the City of Las Vegas tax that's $77.15, you'd have a township tax of about 20 or 25 cents. So the difference between our rate and the county rate's probably in the neighborhood of 50 cents per hundred. So their rate's probably closer to $2.70, $2.80, somewhere around there.
But the
And they
others,
would also have a fire district rate. They have some other overlapping rates that they use to provide
so some of the
municipal
numbers
services.
are changed then.
They're different, yes.
Just as a reminder, back in October, we talked about triggers for corrective action. This, again, was the idea that we track this stuff monthly. We probably report it to you monthly, but we didn't want to overreact and try to adjust our modeling and look at perhaps more stringent corrective action if it wasn't warranted. So we established a 2% threshold on revenues. If the revenues estimate changed by more than 2%, that could be a trigger. 2% is about $10 million, a little more than $10 million, so we thought that was a reasonable threshold. Or if we had a reduction in revenues that exceeded more than 50% of our revenue stabilization, that might be a reason to take a look at that as well. So those were our corrective actions. And just to finish up the revenue forecast before I turn it over to Betsy here, this was a 2009 revenue. Our budget said 537.2. Back in October, we revised it down. Our current forecast, we're telling you it's going to come in at 514. That's about a 2%, a little over 2%. I think it's 2.3% reduction for 2009. In 2010, we're seeing an additional reduction. We're seeing that consolidated taxes continue to drop, and we think property tax is going to drop. Now, we may be a little too aggressive with the property tax number, but when we get the final numbers from the state and from the county treasurer, then we may adjust that. But for right now, I think that's a decent number. So we're looking at about 2.1% reduction in our revenues. Betsy?
We've talked quite a bit about many of these things because they're part of what Mark described earlier. We have continued to implement the fundamental service review recommendations. We've talked about the Revenue Stabilization Fund this afternoon already. We have talked about some of the capital improvement projects that have been delayed. We implemented the voluntary separation program, which I'm going to go into a little more detail in a later slide on that. And obviously, we've brought 3 different contract amendments to you from our collective bargaining units who agreed to a 1% reduction, or approximately 1% reduction for the balance of their contracts. I thought it would be helpful for you, I know this is kind of a busy slide, but I thought it would be helpful for you to see where some of these cuts have been happening and what the magnitude of those cuts are. And I have on a later slide these grouped by category, service category areas. But, as you can see here, there have been reductions pretty much across the board, with the exception of Bev, but Bev has an election this year, so the clerk actually went up a little bit. But pretty much everywhere else, we've had pretty significant reductions leading up to that $48 million that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So you can kind of see all the contributors there to those savings. When you group them up by function, now you can kind of see the magnitude of the cuts. They weren't across the board. Even though we've told you that we've cut approximately 8% out of our budget, you can see how that breaks out. Public safety has been about a 2% reduction. General government has taken quite a bit of a hit, if you will, at 19% of all the cuts. You've got culture and recreation taking 12%, judicial 17%. Public works is kind of a little bit of an odd duck because we have started capitalizing our costs for staffing that supports capital projects. So we're charging our manpower to the projects. This is a project we've been working on for quite some time to get this in place, and it's really helping the general fund out as a result now. And economic assistance is a drastic reduction because the little bit we had left of general fund.
Economic development.
What did I say?
No, you're right.
Yeah, economic development. What was left of that was general funded, we moved all the way over to the RDA. So the redevelopment agency is basically paying for all of the economic assistance line now. So you can see that you've got close to a 9% reduction there across all of those different areas, and you can kind of see how that's been apportioned out.
Betsy, if you go back to that,
Sure.
I want to be clear you understand. Those percentages by the functional areas is not their share of the total reduction. It's their reduction in their function. So the $6.7 million represents a 2% reduction to the public safety in total. So that makes the other numbers, the general government, the culture rec, the other numbers take on a new significance when you think of them in terms of that's a percentage reduction from where you were budgeted in 2009. Significant reductions.
Thanks, Mark. Let's talk a little bit about the success of the voluntary separation. These are updated results from the last time we presented this. Our Human Resources Department really did a magnificent job working through this. And so I think we made this program very successful. As you look at this, there were over 70 people who threw their name in. 46 of those were ultimately approved. This really helped us as it related to the building and safety reduction in force that we just went through. We ended up paying out about $1.5 million. The average amount we paid out was around $32,000. Our vacancy savings, as you can tell there in this current fiscal year, will exceed what it costs to pay out those employees who left. And then next year we're estimating a little over $6 million in savings. And that's one of those that keeps giving, because we told each of the department heads when they were considering these applications that they needed to be ready to keep these positions vacant for at least 2 years. And in public safety, it takes us a little while longer to recover those costs, as you can't really leave a lot of those positions vacant for extended periods of time. But they pay for themselves over time as well.
Your Goodman.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Real quickly, is this an ongoing offer, if you will, the voluntary separation? Is this something that we offer in periods of time or eligibility periods?
A lot of it is based on what we think we can afford, and because of extenuating circumstances, particularly with the building and safety reduction in force, we felt like it was important for us to offer an opportunity to the employees that might just need a little extra incentive if they have decided they wanted to make a career change, or they were worried they might get caught up in the reduction in force, that at least they'd have a choice. And it's not that typical. We haven't done one since 2005, I think was the last voluntary separation program that we had. And that one was actually much more of a retirement incentive program than a voluntary separation program. So this one was broader.
Is the program over?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. And it's important to also point out that 71 requests and 46 approved. You made a comment that, some of these positions, each department head has to determine whether some of these positions are going to be left open for quite some time, and is that going to leave them shorthanded at those levels. So I just wanted to make that clear, why we see that difference in those numbers, because you didn't make that clear enough.
Okay.
I think.
Yes, people may have applied. Some people who applied had already quit. They had already left their position, but they were maybe burning out vacation or something like that. There were requests along those lines. Well, why would we pay out a voluntary separation program for someone who's already made another career decision? So there are a variety of different examples. And then there were examples like the ones you mentioned, Councilman, where just the department head or the manager's office didn't feel that we could justify leaving that position open for 2 years. We knew that it was a critical position. We needed to have that person in that job to get things done. So we did have to say no some. But I think one of the little good things about this is that of all the individuals who were going to be RIF'd out of building and safety, we were able to take care of all but 4. And this program afforded a great opportunity for that. And some of those people were even offered a position of placement, and they turned it down. So it really worked magnificently.
Your Honor, also maybe a good time to tell the public and about the enterprise fund and how building and safety operates. That's not part of these numbers. They're a separate budget and a separate function, if you want to explain that for a minute.
Sure. Well, it's an enterprise fund, which we've talked a little bit today about the internal service funds. An enterprise fund basically has to operate like a business. So if they don't have the work or the revenue coming in to sustain themselves, then they have to make adjustments in their expenditures to make their budget balance. And if they don't have the money, then they can't employ the people or they can't provide that service.
Basically, if you don't have the business, you don't have the work.
Right.
Mayor Goodman.
Yes.
This might be a good time to ask this question, and I think I asked you this question in a briefing within the last few weeks. Over the last 18 or 24 or so months, how many employees have had to leave the City of Las Vegas employment involuntarily? In other words, they didn't voluntarily separate, they didn't transfer to another department.
How many were actually released?
Yes.
Claudette, do you have that number? All right.
I think
if we
when
have
you
an
asked that, I
approximation.
think my guess was it was certainly. You'll see a slide here in a bit where we've actually we've reduced employment by 318 staff by 318, and I think it's less than 10% of that. Clearly, 30 positions or less is what we had to actually RIF in the 2 actions in building and safety. So there's
And those were people that we could not find another place for.
ultimately.
Right. Well, I believe there were some individuals in the first round of RIFs in building and safety that did not have bumping rights. They were the least senior in that job class, and so they wouldn't have had an opportunity necessarily to go to another job. That's why I'm hesitating about answering that question, because I can't remember how many were in that category.
It may even be 20 to 25. I mean, I was being very generous by saying 30, but it's certainly less than 10%.
Right. Mark just alluded to these numbers. This shows you the reductions in our staff complement, basically, over the last couple of years. we have closed or frozen 318 full-time equivalent positions. That's pretty significant. So we've gone from around 3,215 full-time equivalent positions down to 2,897. So consistent with the earlier graph of the 9% reduction overall, you can see that this is about a 9%, almost, I think it's close to 10.
Yeah,
10% reduction in staffing.
And these numbers in the middle, the closed or frozen, are net of or after the positions that the city manager's office decided to add back because they were deemed to be critical. And there were roughly combined both general fund and non-general fund. There was about 114 of those. So if you do that math, we actually, until we decided to add them back, we were down, by my math, 14.5% in terms of our staffing, almost 15% reduction in staffing. But because of concerns that we've had with some of you and with ourselves in terms of where those vacancies are, we felt it was prudent to add them back. We feel we can't afford to add them back, but you'll see a little bit later that there are some consequences to doing that we have to deal with maybe in fiscal years 11 and 12.
And it also kind of explains why there was some delay in restoring some of the positions that we talked about with you as much as 6 months ago. Because we were sitting on these frozen positions, and that really helped us in our vacancy savings this year to make our budget look the way that it looks right now for the way we probably will close out this year. But for having those vacancies, we may be having a little bit different discussion. And that's why you're going to see in the next couple of years that with the restoration of some of these positions and not having probably as many vacancies as we've been used to having because we've cut so much back, that we're going to have to continue to keep a real close eye on those costs going forward. I thought you might be interested in seeing, Mark mentioned the 80-some positions that the city manager's office went through and identified as needing to be restored, the funding restored to them, taking them out of the frozen position list, if you will. And there they are. You can see that the lion's share of them are in fire, detention, public works, and field ops. And there's a smattering in the rest of the departments. Obviously, not all departments got any positions unfrozen in this process. So primarily your larger departments that were in need of additional staffing.
And FTE is full-time employees.
Full-time equivalent.
Equivalent. What does that mean?
Roughly, in a normal cycle, you're working 52 weeks a year, 40 hours a week. So that's 2,080 hours. But because of leave, with sick leave and vacation and holiday, you're really not here physically working. So if you're here, if we get 1,800 hours of productive time on the job working, that's a full-time equivalent.
And I just want to say before I let Mark go to this next slide, that this is where we have been able to do things like enhancing code enforcement and things of that nature, field maintenance, obviously refilling vacant fire positions. There's some risk management issues that we're also trying to address in these position restorations to make sure that we're not putting ourselves at risk or the people that we take care of at risk, so that we're making sure that we're doing the very best we can for the public. So I just wanted to point that out to you, that this is where that happens.
Now I get to put you to sleep with numbers. This current forecast is just a snapshot, and I know it's very difficult to read, but it's a snapshot of what we're looking at into the future. And what I really want to call your attention to is in that red circle is fiscal year 10. That's the budget year we're working on. And so really everything to the right of that, fiscal year 11, 12, 13, and 14, it's a forecast. It's not a budget. We're not saying it's going to happen exactly that way, but for planning purposes, in order to decide how much of an action do we need to take today in the 2010 budget, that's what we're using it for. I want to call your attention down to the bottom. If you see the red circle down at the bottom, you look at the fund balance. I mentioned earlier that we're going to close this year with almost a 20% fund balance. And you might say, well, what the heck were you thinking? You know, you got all this money. Well, right away in 2010, our revenues are going to be short of our expenditures by almost $37 million. We're going to purposely draw down $37 million from our fund balance, dropping it down to about $66 million, or about 13%. So that's the first thing we're going to do. And so basically what we're saying is we've saved enough, we've taken some actions already, we think we're in a good position for 10. But the other years, in 11, 12, 13, and 14, there's some actions that we're assuming in this model, and I just wanted to talk to you about them, not because we're going to take necessarily those actions, but I wanted you to understand what we're trying to do. The first thing you'll notice now, the red circle around the revenue stabilization. In years 11, 12, and 13, we're looking at about $41 million we're going to have to pump back into the general fund from the revenue stabilization fund. It's going to have to come back at some point, and it's going to have to come back because the revenues are not going to be sufficient to pay for the expenditures. So that's what's happening there. The other thing you'll notice, some of the math whizzes in the audience might notice that the wages and benefits of 286.6 in FY10 drops to 282.7 in FY11. And they may say, well, how did that happen? Well, the model assumes at this point that we'll be in negotiations again for we're assuming that we're going to be looking at a couple one-year contracts that will have to be renegotiated for fiscal year 10. We've got a few other contracts that'll will probably be in the negotiation in 11. We're thinking that we're going to have to reopen some of those contracts, perhaps, and we may have to ask for more. Don't know what we'll get. I can tell you what the model assumes. The model is assuming about a 2% rollback in wages and another 1% reduction in the growth rate. That's what the model is assuming in years 11 through 14. The next thing that the model is assuming is, even with all that I just mentioned, putting in more stabilization money, making some additional adjustments to our labor costs, we still are going to have to look at some kind of a reduction in costs sometime in fiscal year 12. Now, maybe, Councilman Wilson, this is a time maybe in fiscal 12 we offer another voluntary separation program, perhaps. But something will probably have to happen in the way of reduction in costs somewhere around there. So I just kind of wanted to walk you through those so you understand that everything in 11 through 14, there's some assumptions there. But because we have been so prudent in saving up money both in our stabilization fund or general fund, I don't think there's any reason for us to overreact any more than we have already in fiscal year 10.
Mark,
Goodman?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Could you go back a slide, Mark, please?
With this one here?
Yes. Your forecast for FY11 and on, if you will, under the wages and benefits category assumes a potential additional 2% on top of another 1%?
No, 1% on top of the one already there.
Okay, a 1% on top of the 1%.
So a total of 2% reduction in the growth rate, but it also assumes a 2% rollback. So if you were making $100 today, it assumes we roll it back to 98, and then the future growth is now reduced by 2% as opposed to 1%.
Is that somewhat of an optimistic forecast?
Probably.
And the reason I bring that out is because generally, Mark, you've been pretty conservative with us.
Well, and again, I don't want to get too overreacting here. It's clear in my mind that fiscal year 10, we can certainly afford to draw down the fund balance. There's just no doubt about that. The question is, have we cut enough, and when do we cut, and how do we cut? And in my mind, these next 12 months, I mean, I'll be back here a year from now, and Betsy and I will be here, God willing, and we'll be telling you the things that we think you need to do in order to get through fiscal year 11. If we're wrong about the timing of the recovery and the recession, then we're wrong about this forecast, and that will affect how what we'll be telling you. But it could go either way.
I think the other thing that's important to point out is that this model doesn't take into account two things. Mm-hmm. Any sort of legislative impact. No, not built in here. Obviously, this doesn't include any impact of the stimulus funding either. So as we go through the next 3 or 4 months, we're going to begin to see the impacts of either or both of those things. I will tell you that I think on the economic stimulus front, you're going to maybe see some benefit on the operating line, but you're probably going to see more on the project side. We haven't gotten to capital yet, but that's probably where you're going to see most of the impact of the stimulus. So I think we need to be careful that this doesn't show all the other things that could possibly impact this model. And that's why we're trying to be very conservative, but realistic. Mark said this early on in his presentation. We bought ourselves a year with all the hard work we've done in the last 2 years, and that's all we bought ourselves is 1 year. And so the hard work has to begin anew, and we will continue to monitor all of our positions, program growth, program changes, as well as implementing those other fundamental service review recommendations. When we brought that to you in October, we didn't have any idea if we consolidated graphic arts and PIO what we'd save. Well, look, just from doing that, we've saved $500,000. So we've got another probably 15 of those kinds of recommendations that need thorough analysis. There are other things that we're trying to do. We're trying to leverage technology to be able to make sure that when we go to the atrium, that we're going there with the best technology, so that instead of having to ramp back up in staffing when we get there, assuming there's a reemergence in the development market, that we will have technology to help us be able to manage staffing. Instead of having to hire people, we can do things smarter and faster using that technology. And quite frankly, greener in a much more sustainable manner. So we're trying to keep our eye on all those things. Some of them are just going to take us this next 12 months to really get them worked out and get them in a place where we know what the impact is, so we can see what the impact will be on the model.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes, Councilman.
Yes, Mr. Vincent, for revenue growth FY09, there's a negative 2.3%.
Correct.
And for FY10, there's a negative 2.1.
Correct.
And for FY11, there's a positive of 2.1, which makes for a 4% positive revenue growth. Explain that, being that FY12 and 13 are flat at 1% growth.
Yeah, what you're looking at there is certainly a 4-point swing from a -2 to a +2, but the reality is the 532 only represents a $30 million growth over the 503, and that is excluding, by the way, excluding the 18. Let me go back a little bit. You've got to exclude those numbers because those are one-time transfers and not real revenues. Okay, the transfers in for the revenue. So if you exclude
So the 18, 13, and 10 are arbitrary numbers?
No, they're numbers that were, I'll get to that in a second, but they're not arbitrary. They were designed to accomplish a goal, and I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
But so the problem here is if you're looking at that 532, it includes the 18, so it's really 514. So you're looking at 514 over the 503. That's only a 2% growth. It's not a lot of growth. But it does assume that it's growth, and so it does assume the recession is bottomed out and the economy is coming back sometime in fiscal year 11, which could be late, 12, which could be late in calendar year 10 or early in calendar year 12.
Okay, and secondly,
11. I'm sorry.
10, 11.
11.
Yeah.
I'm with you. The expenditure growth at I see the 36.5 million. That's from the drawdown, right?
That's the drawdown, right?
Okay. And in FY11, you have
There's another
1.3, which is 14.8 million of the drawdown. Why the disparity between the FY10 and 11 with, yes, go back.
This is the answer here.
Okay, explain that, please.
What we're trying to do is a combination of a controlled drawdown of the fund balance along with a controlled drawdown of the revenue stabilization. We're trying to maintain a fund balance that's around 10%. So if you look at that bottom line, which is budget policy fund balance percentage,
Right.
it goes from 13.1 to 9.9, 9.8, 10.4, 10.4. We're trying to maintain a fund balance of about 10%, which
So you
is
don't
we
want to go
talk.
below that.
That's right.
Okay.
That's what our target. So whatever we need to get us there is what we're pulling back in.
Okay, great.
Councilman
Thank you.
Stump. Councilman Stump.
Thank you. I guess on the revenue side, I look at C-tax and property tax. I'd like you to explain to me how fast you see a growth in property tax, because historically, I'm not sure we've had historical like we've had in real estate recently, anywhere, but it's a slow growth. It's a slow comeback on real estate taxes, because generally you're behind a year anyway, and I see you starting to tick it up in 11, and it really starts to take off after that. Is this your belief that we're going to have substantial growth in property tax values quickly?
I don't think you're going to see substantial. I don't think 2% growth is substantial. So let me go through the numbers. Maybe that would be help. What my assumptions were.
Because of what was announced over the weekend and how it dropped. Doesn't it continue to drop for a while? Aren't we in that mode potentially?
Historically, which doesn't mean anything today, but
Right.
just to kind of talk through it a little bit. Historically, we were seeing, for about 10 years in a row, we were seeing property tax growth that was averaging 10% a year. And you might say, well, how the heck does that happen? Well, it would look like, and when you pull the numbers, the data part, it looks like about 6.5 percentage points of that 10% was new construction. And the 3.5 was just normal appreciation. Well, there's not been anything normal about it the last 4 years. We've had 2 years in a row, we had 30% appreciation, and now the bubbles burst and we're kind of making up to where we are. The model presumes that the combination of increased value and new construction is going to produce a 2% rate of growth in fiscal year 11. Now, I don't think that's significant, but
I'm
Yeah,
only
and-
concerned that 75% of what's sitting out there today is
yeah.
bank-owned or whatever, and it's going to drag everything until that
Yeah.
is gone.
And-
And we're going to go down as opposed to up until we get rid of that and start on the upswing again. And I'm just guessing how long, as you're guessing how long that's going
Yep.
to be.
I mean, those are really good questions, and I wish I had a better answer
Yeah.
for you. But it's predicated on my assumption that it will be a 3-year recession, and that we'll start to see some recovery somewhere in fiscal year 11, not at the beginning, but somewhere in the middle of fiscal year 11, that we'll start to see it. And maybe that's a bad assumption, but
And how does real estate relate to the increase then in C-tax? What has to happen in the real estate market? Because the real estate market has to lead us back out of this situation, I believe, in order for the rest of it to take off.
It's kind of interesting in the C-tax because where we are now, probably the biggest single component that's killing us, the C-tax, doesn't necessarily relate directly to construction. It's meals and entertainment. I mean, people are not going out. I mean, in terms of dollar value, that's the biggest single killer for us.
Yeah, and that's what I'm driving at, is we've got to get these houses back on track before people even start to spend again on the other things that drive that C-tax. And I think that it will be delayed because of that.
Well, it could
We
very
could
well.
discuss forever, but I think those are things I worry about.
I will tell you that we are, and you'll see it a little bit later on, there's a slide on the schedule, and we are, if you recall last summer, we used a group of 6 individuals outside of the city to help us review our model. We called it the Financial Oversight Committee, and we're trying to reconvene them between now and the final budget to try to test some of these things that we're assuming.
Yeah.
So we'll look at it.
I don't think in my career in real estate, I've been through 8 of these recessions or whatever they are, and never have I seen real estate lead us into this mess. Therefore, real estate has to lead us out of this mess. That's what I believe on this one. Other factors have been around before, but this time we have a very different situation.
Okay.
Councilman, we can make sure that we discuss that with both Mark's Advisory Committee and the Financial Review Committee to just see if we're being conservative enough.
Okay.
I mean, you're seeing a decrease next year. We have not projected a decrease in revenue up until this year. We've just had to absorb them. And so we'll be very careful to make sure we discuss that with them.
Mr. Vincent, I know when we meet with the Civilian Review Committee, whatever we're calling them, they're going to take great pains to analyze the wages and benefits, which are on the current forecast. What are those based on?
Again, those are. I can tell you what the assumptions we're looking at. When we talk about fiscal years 11 through 14, we're looking at about a 3.3% average wage growth, on the wage line only, and which is significantly. That's about 2 percentage points below what it historically has been. And the benefit just growing slightly faster, 4.2. The combined the combined rate of growth is going to be somewhere in the high 3% range. So that's what we can argue about the merits of that up or down, but it is a significant reduction from what historically lots that has to happen for us to get there.
And that's the total package. That's not. I don't want anybody out there misunderstanding that projection would be a 3% COLA, for instance.
That's not what
That's the total wage growth for the city. So that would be everything included: steps, COLAs, differential pay, any of that stuff. All of that is counted in there. That's a total all-in number.
All right, that's what we talk about during our personnel sessions, and we'll continue that discussion. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to, I think, leave this chart if you're ready. This is the graphic representation of what happens to our fund balance if all those assumptions that we made come true. And you can see the drastic reduction from 09 to 10 in the green bar, which is the fund balance in millions of dollars, which goes to the scale on the left. And again, the infamous red dotted bar that is the percentage. In this case, it's not percentage. It's the number of weeks that the cash in the fund balance represents. Another week's coverage. In other words, if we have expenditures of $500 million and we have a $50 million fund balance, that's 1/10. 1/10 of 52 weeks is 5.2 weeks, and so that's what the scale on the right is. It's the weeks of coverage. And we had a policy of trying to maintain a 12% fund balance, which is a 6.3 weeks of coverage. We dropped that down to 10% because we created the Revenue Stabilization Fund. That was one of the offsetting issues. And so we're trying to maintain it close to 10 weeks of coverage. And that dotted blue line is where you want to make sure the red line doesn't go significantly below the dotted blue line. And for lots of reasons, not only just for our own fiscal stability in terms of our operational needs, but also because it would affect our bond rating, and it'll could have a direct impact on our ability to raise operating construction capital in the future if our bond ratings suffer. It would cost us more, or potentially make it such that we couldn't even borrow it.
Mark, do you mind going back to that earlier slide? Dare I go back to this slide? But I think there are a couple other things that are worth noting. Mark showed you the $10 million reduction in FY12. So it's pretty apparent, but I just want to make sure we point it out. There are no new positions being created throughout this entire model. So there's no...
Except those on the bottom line for the
right.
capital projects.
The 1.3, the 1.8, the 3.3, those are the only program expansions, and those are completely based on your current capital improvement program and having new parks or new facilities come online that require maintenance or programming. I think that's a fire station out there in FY12.
Yep.
So just so you're aware, if we need to do things differently or address different community needs, we have to work within the resources we have in order to get there, which is why it will require quite a bit of flexibility on the part of our employees and our organization to be able to adapt to those changing needs of the community. We won't be able to just add people to do it.
Again, just to reiterate, when we talk about fiscal year 11 through 14, we think there's going to be some additional actions, and it'll depend on how accurate my smoky crystal ball is. So we'll always have a need to fill some critical vacant positions. We may need to have additional labor concessions, and that's something we need to be working on now and through the rest of this fiscal year in preparation for fiscal year 11. We may need to have some targeted program reductions, and Betsy's already mentioned, the FSR, the second phase of FSR. We had 240 some odd suggestions made. We were in the process of implementing have implemented about 106 of those. Some are in process, some are completed, but there's another 140 or 130 suggestions out there that we need to vet out and decide is this something we can do or not. And if it makes sense, we need to look at it. In all likelihood, we'll have to do combinations of all three of those things, in addition to drawing down the fund balance and drawing down from the revenue stabilization fund. It's clear we're going to have to do those things as well.
And I think it's important to just note before we go on to the capital plan that the thing that we have discussed is that if there's not work to be done in certain parts of our organization, we have to make some difficult decisions related to that. So if the workload has diminished to such a point that it doesn't substantiate us having people in those positions, then that would be an opportunity for us to try and reposition them, get them into positions that we do need filled right away. But we can't just keep people when there's not enough work to be done. And so we're keeping a real close eye out for those areas because, as Mark indicated, we saw it pretty dramatically in building and safety. There are probably other areas in the city where we may have taken advantage of the capacity to get caught up after 5 years of unbelievable growth. Some of that work may be running out over the next year, too, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that.
Just a little bit on the capital project fund. We are able to add some projects to the funded list, typically not from sources in the general fund, from other sources, and I'd like to kind of run down these a little bit. Fire Station 107, we needed an additional $3.1 million. I think the total project is something like $6.3 million for this construction of the station up in Sun City. We needed additional $3.1 as a result of some reviews we were doing and some discussions we had a while ago, several months ago, with respect to what was going into the Revenue Stabilization Fund. We've decided to use the excess fire safety initiative for this capital project because it's not needed for operations, so we're going to use that to fund that. Stupak Park, we're fortunate in that the construction for the Stupak Center is less than we had estimated. We're going to have about $3.2 million remaining. That was funded predominantly by CDBG, but there's also some general fund money in there as well. And we would suggest that the Stupak Park then be fully funded for its completion. There's a series of West Las Vegas projects, road projects, and landscape and beautification. Some of that landscaping includes and signage includes the Enterprise Park area, as well as setting aside some money to begin design for the remodel of the historic West Las Vegas School, which is sort of the entryway there on I think it's on D Street. Those monies are predominantly coming either from CDBG or from 1% room tax, which is road tax monies, as well as the redevelopment agency. Durango, Riley, and Teton, this is residential construction tax money here again that was left over from the first phases 2 and phases 3 of those two projects, and we're suggesting that just carries over into these next phases and perhaps can help us with design of those next phases if they're not already designed. So that's about $12 million that we're suggesting could be added back. I suspect we'll have some additional discussions as we go along here over the next few months. This number may change. There's some concerns that we have with respect to some of our capital IT projects, where we're trying to leverage technology to gain some efficiency so we can work better and work faster and smarter without bodies, but there's a capital investment up front that we need to make for that. So we're looking at that as well as some of the technology needs we have for moving into the atrium.
I think that might be phase 2 and 3, not 3 and 4.
Is it? Did I have it
Yeah,
backwards?
I just wanted to make sure we were clear for the record that's Mark added those up. Got you into the next phase without completing the prior phase.
That's what happens when you're acting deputy city managers working in the slide 15 minutes before it's due. Okay. Sorry about that. Glad somebody caught it. So what does that look like on the 5-year capital plan? With those additions, we're still looking at $635 million worth of expenditures in fiscal year 10. That's the budget year. Again, very much like with our projection, the state requires us to file a 5-year capital plan, and so we do include estimates for 11, 12, 13, and 14, but that doesn't mean they're funded. That means it's a plan. That's a plan that we think can reasonably be funded, but the fact of the matter is they're not funded until we actually have the money in hand and you actually appropriate for those. So this is about $150 million less than what it was last year because we really haven't added anything significant to it. And because of what's happening with land sales, there's not much in the way of BLM's Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act money coming in either. So that's what's really happening here. And then just like to close with the redevelopment agency, we're asking the redevelopment agency to take on some interesting additional burdens that it hasn't in the past, but it's because it has the capacity to do that. I've said it many times in the course of this past year and a half, that if there's a bright spot for the city, it's what's been happening in the downtown, and it's the success we've had with the redevelopment agency. What we're looking at is our consultant, Kaiser Marston, in preparation for our bond sale, revised their forecast for fiscal year 2010 on the property tax, which is the increment, property tax increment. And they're predicting almost a $3 million reduction from 9 to 10. I'm not quite sure I believe that yet. I'll believe it when we see it, but for the time being, we're using that. This affordable housing, AH is affordable housing set aside. It's just merely 18% of the tax increment. You can see some of the other income. Most of that's interest, and there is some other income in there as well. The next group of numbers, the bonds, TIF is tax increment finance notes, VRB is variable rate bonds, and the interfund loan. All those 4 items represent long-term obligations or medium-term obligations that the RDA has agreed to pick up. And so one thing you'll see is the success of selling our RDA bonds. The debt service is going from $6.3 to $10.9 million. The TIF notes are as already negotiated and agreed to. The variable rate bonds, I'm not sure that $900,000. Right now we're paying interest only. We don't have to start paying interest and principal until fiscal year 11 or 12. I forgot which. That interest number may be high. It's an astoundingly low interest rate we're paying right now on those. And then the interfund loan. This is the portion of the projects that we've identified that the RDA bonds that we sold, which netted about $75 million, are short. There's still some funding needs, either for the Performing Arts Center or for the infrastructure or even for the museum or other projects. And so what we try to do is size how much could the redevelopment agency borrow on the medium-term interfund loan and still be able to adequately pay it back with a 3% interest. And we arrived at about $15 million, and that's what that $1.8 million represents, is a 10-year debt service on that $15 million. The rest you can see with respect to what's other expenditures. The other line and the project line, I should have combined those. The other represents professional services and marketing that relate to RDA projects. So really the project related. So you could take the other and the project line and add those together. And you can see that we are looking at having a net cash flow deficit in fiscal year 10 of about $8.3 million, but they have a healthy beginning balance. And I think there are going to be some additional projects, whether they show up in fiscal year 10 or fiscal year 11, there's going to be some additional redevelopment projects that this money will go towards. It'll go towards a project of some sort of project. So that's kind of where we're sitting on the redevelopment budget.
Is Sal and Ben a New Delhi or an ice cream parlor?
Salary and benefits. Sal and Ben. Only you would make that comment to me.
I tell you.
I look at this RDA budget, and it really looks like we got one of our entities within an entity that's doing really, really good. And I was just wondering, Betsy, would it be possible to use some of this funding here in the RDA for some of the capital projects that we have?
Sure, we can certainly look at that.
That would free up some of the money that we could maybe. I'm on a campaign here to get some baseball fields out in Ward 1. I really feel like that's one of the areas that we're really underserviced as far as our parks. And so, Councilwoman, I would like to ask you if you could kind of look at some of the funding that we have for our capital projects now.
Mhm.
If we could use some of this RDA money for those projects, to free up some of that money that we could help Councilwoman Tarkanian get some baseball fields, whether it be at Rotary Park or the new park out there at Fireman's Memorial or something where she can get 3 or 4 baseball fields.
We'll certainly be happy to look into that. I know we had a healthy discussion this morning about kind of some of the sources and uses as it relates to the 3 big projects that Mark just referenced. To make sure that we're putting the right money in the right place, we'd certainly be happy to look at that other list of
I
CIP
certainly don't want to take
projects.
anything away from any other projects, but if we can use some of this money here in some of those capital projects, then it would sure be a benefit to Ward 1.
Sure, we can certainly look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just by way of disclosure, I don't have a slide for this, but we talked about in the briefings, based on what we think we know today, there's about $20 million in funding in the capital project fund in general that's going to be freed up. About $15 million of that's general fund cash from contributions we've made, and about $5 million is proceeds from a park and rec bond that we haven't spent yet. So there's $20 million in there. We know we have a lot, in addition to what you see in the RDA, and so we know we have some varied needs, some of which may not come to fruition in fiscal year 10, maybe in fiscal year 11. So I think Betsy's exactly right. I think we can look at judiciously which projects look like they're going to go, which ones have needs and are ready to be constructed. I think we'll take a look at that. I think we can make some additional changes. Just to remind you, we do have some issues with the FF&E on the City Hall. We have some issues in the parking garage. We know we have some parking commitments with the Performing Arts Center that we got to figure out how we're going to service those commitments, whether we can combine those with one garage or have to build a separate garage. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. So I'd be happy to come back with some different scenarios. And just as a reminder, on April 15th, we're going to file this as a tentative budget, which is subject to your adjustments between now and May 19th. We're trying to schedule a financial review committee. We haven't quite scheduled that yet, but we'll try to bring those experts in to help us with some of the forecasting that Councilman Steinman's brought up. On May 8th, we have the Citizens Advisory Priority Committee. On May 19th is the budget hearing, and the budget needs to be filed by June 1st. That's our presentation.
Very good. Are there any comments or questions at this time?
I have some, Your Honor.
Councilman.
Thank you. Ms. Fretwell, when you started today's meeting, you stood before us and said, hey, we're kind of doing okay today. That's kind of what we're at today with our budget, am I right?
Right.
We're doing okay today.
We're doing okay today.
And
After cutting significantly.
after doing a
After
whole bunch of
major
work,
cuts.
we're looking pretty good today, aren't we?
Right.
And I must commend you and your staff and share how grateful I am with you by getting us to this point. And I want to say the same thing for every employee in this city for understanding the situation that we're in and taking these steps necessary to make it happen. You said that not many city administrators are going to stand in front of their boards and make these kind of comments that you did today, that we're doing okay. I commend you for that. I mentioned this a long time ago when we started this fundamental service review, that even after we get through these trying times, that our city government runs like a well-oiled machine, that we don't have any of that waste. We eliminate that waste and we streamline the functions. And every department and every director and department head has done that from what I've seen. And they need to be commended as well. The residents of this city have grown accustomed to the kind of service that we've been providing to them. And I must say during this time that I've heard very little about, cutting services here, cutting services there, what happened to this and what happened to that. I haven't heard it. And that's significant to me because I listen. We all listen to our constituents. We all listen to the neighborhoods. And I, for one, have not heard that. I want to make this one more comment, Your Honor. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to say a bold statement. I think we are the first municipality in this state that's taken the bull by the horns and looked at this a long time ago and said, this is where we're headed, and we've got to make some adjustments so we're okay by tomorrow. And I think we've done that. And I think we are the first city that's done that. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? I hope you're right, Mr. Vincent. I don't think you are. Everything that I see is going to be much more daunting than your predictions. I agree that the staff has done a phenomenal job. When I talk about the staff, I'm talking about the members of our collective bargaining units who have stepped up and who recognize the realities of today, and the manager's office and the directors when they cut down on the various positions and sucked up when you had to suck up in order to reach the point that we are. But everything that I see is so pessimistic and gloomy, not from the Las Vegas perspective, because I think we probably will come out of this faster than anybody else, but from a national as well as global perspective. I spoke to somebody today back in Washington who says they're in the doldrums. They just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel here. I heard that IBM, I believe it was IBM, is going to lay 5,000 people off. We certainly managed ourselves much better than the AIG folks and the banks and GM. But what my only fear is that we're not going to come back as quickly as you predict on a global basis, and that will trickle down to us. And do we address that now, having bought a year, because that's what we did, we bought a year, or do we enjoy the year that we bought and then worry about it when we see it coming and hitting us right in the kisser?
I don't think we're enjoying anything, to tell you the truth. I think this is going to be a very hard year for us because it's not over.
It's not over, and it's not over up north
Right.
in Carson City, and every morning I wake up with my fingers crossed, hoping that we're going to get through the day. And I hope that they realize that your hard efforts and the prudence of this council should not be subject to punishment as a good deed. I hope they realize this, because if they impose any further burden on us, and so far we're doing all right,
Yeah.
and I thank them for that, but if they impose any further burden on us, everything we heard today shifts. We have to come right back to the table again and start from scratch.
Absolutely. And I think we're aware of that. And, as Mark said, I don't think this is going to be an easy year. We may have gotten a pass for this year, but people are working really hard in this organization right now.
You earned the pass. You didn't get a pass. You earned the pass. There's a
Well,
big difference.
a lot of hard work went into getting us a little extra time to prepare. And I think that we're seeing it. I mean, we're seeing it in indicators in our organization. We've got sick leave going up. We have some very, very ill individuals, catastrophically ill individuals in this that work for us. And I think a lot of this is because people are going the extra mile, they're stressed out, and they're trying to do their very best for this community. And it's taking a toll on our workers. I'm really worried about it. But quite frankly, I don't see that we can do anything more than we've done right now, given the financial situation we're in. I think we can take a breath now. It may mean that in 3 months we're standing here saying, wow, C-Tax continued this unbelievable decline, or Councilman Steinman may be right. We get some projections from the county on property tax that are more dire than ours. I think we just have to be poised and ready to respond, which is what I think has helped us. Our flexibility and our adaptability has really helped us over the last 18 months. And it gives us a little more time to implement what you've directed us to do so that we can see the impact of those things.
Right, and there are certain buzzwords these days. Transparency is one of them. I'm glad that we're having this kind of discussion in a public forum so that everybody will see where we're coming from and where we came from and where we're going. Because there may be a time that we're going to have to call them back and say to our employees, we have to change the basic philosophy as to how we're doing business today based on the assumptions that Mr. Vincent has brought before us. It could change virtually overnight.
Yeah, I think Betsy hit it right on the head. What we've done is we've gotten ourselves time, but it's not time to rest. It's time to plan and analyze and make a good decision. One thing we've tried to do is give you as much advance warning so that when you're making the decisions, you're making the best decisions you can. It's a lot harder to deal with this when all of a sudden you realize, my gosh, I got to cut, 300 positions out, and if I don't ever want to be standing in front of you telling you I missed it that much, and we got to cut 300 positions just because we're not. We bought time, but all that time is going to do for us is allow us to plan better for what the next steps are.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. The time did not buy us a celebration.
No.
It bought us a time to address maybe some bleaker news than that which we faced this past 6 months or so.
Well, and the discussion that we had earlier with the really complicated chart, a 2% rollback in salaries or wages, as well as a further reduction in the growth rate of those going forward, those are not easy discussions to have. And we're going to need this time to have those discussions over the course of this next year.
Mayor Goodman?
Yes, Councilman.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I too, I'm very pleased with your staff's ability to look at the various department budgets and shrink them. I know the department heads are already operating on a shoestring budget with the ability to draw down the funds from the various sources, Mark, whether it be the general fund or the various departments' budgets. I look at it as how you presented it, and that is buying ourselves some time. But also, I take it a step further and saying, are we only extending the inevitable when it comes to the future of what the new face of our new employee will look like? I mean, is this the time now, Mayor, to start talking about a new city package as far as a new employee versus the current employee? And I know that possibly crosses over into some levels of discussion with the various unions in regards to having two different faces as far as employee A and employee B. But we need to consider that if we haven't already.
Well, and I think we're right in the middle of the compensation classification study, which could aid in that discussion, because then we'll actually have real-time market data about employee compensation strategies. And that's really good for everybody to walk in on an equal footing with good, sound, solid information to be able to talk about these difficult issues.
Right.
But we've heard you loud and clear as far as the employee of the future, that we need to start those discussions, and we are doing that.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else? All right, thank you. May I have a motion, please?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, I think all of us up here appreciate all the sacrifices that have been made by the different departments and the department heads and the union members that we have. I would like to incorporate all those things that have been mentioned today, that when we come back, we'll have a better understanding of our budget. But I'm like the mayor also, and the rest of the city council members up here. I'm still scared. I just think that this is going to go a lot longer than what many people have forecast. I look at the stimulus plan, and I can't see that it's doing the city of Las Vegas any good, or that it's going to do us any good in the next 2 or 3 years. So I just ask us to stay prudent, and again, we'll just accept this proposed budget and go forward with it the best we can.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
before the vote, could I just make a comment? First, I wanted to commend you on all your hard work. You have really worked very hard. I want to commend our union representatives, too, because they were the first, in, as far as I know, in Nevada, certainly in southern Nevada, to step forward and take some pay cuts. And I know maybe people don't recognize the full effect of what those pay cuts are, but they were the first to step up, and they also were told by you, we don't know what will be in the future, we may have to come back. But I think they deserve a lot of praise for that. I also commend the fact that you've looked at our fundamental reviews and where we've cut back in some places. For example, we had not replaced those 2 positions in the graffiti patrol, a rapid response patrol, and we found that we couldn't do without them because it was getting out of hand again. They were replaced where you were able to use some people that were rifting from other areas. And I know I've commented before on the need for another 1 or 2 code officers, because in this economy, the focus is still on development, but not as much as it was, and it's far more on economics, and that's where we need the code enforcement officers in our residence area to help. So I just would want that to be considered also.
Mayor, I may be able to respond to that. One of the things that we're trying to do is use our other resources creatively. So one of the things that will be a part of this budget that we'll be recommending will be to use CDBG funding to fund an additional code enforcement officer. As you know, one of the voluntary separations was one of our code enforcement officers. We would replace that person using CDBG funds to do it. So that we're trying to be as creative as we can and address those emerging needs. And that's one step towards that, Councilwoman.
Yeah, and you have shown creative thinking, and you're thinking outside the box, and you're not just trying to put everything into a square peg. You're looking at the differences in the pegs, and I just want to tell you I respect that very much. Thank you.
I did get the answer for Councilman Wolfson.
Okay.
In the first reduction in force, we had 11 separations, and in the second one, we had 10 separations, for a total of 21 separations.
Very good. Thank you. All right, there's been a motion. Let's vote, please. Uh-oh. Is that okay? Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, I'm so proud of myself. Okay. Thank you. We're doing great. Item number 5 is council member recognition. Comments made by individual city council agency members during this portion of the agenda will not be acted upon by the city council or redevelopment agency unless that subject is on the agenda and scheduled for action. Would anyone like to speak at this time under this portion of the agenda? All right, seeing none, then we're going to move on to item number 6, citizens' participation. Citizens' participation and public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the City Council Redevelopment Agency. No subject may be acted upon by the City Council Redevelopment Agency unless that subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If anyone wishes to be heard, please step up here, give us your name, put the 3-minute timer on.
Yes, Juanita Clark, speaking on behalf of Charleston Neighborhood Preservation. This has been wonderful, and also we appreciate the location where you had it held. We've been to these where we had to sit at the back edge of a room and look across a big dark room and look at a great big screen that was very difficult to see, and this made it really very adequate, and so I don't know why that was done in the past, but anyway, we appreciate this. Also, we would commend all of you council people, because we know that staff would have not done that they do what you want them to do, and because of you that they have come up with the things that they've just been complimented on for today, and we appreciate that, because we're residents, of course, here, and are the ones that either suffer or enjoy or participate in what you folks provide for us. We appreciate the mention of the pool and the baseball fields. We are Ward 1 is an area that maybe doesn't have the huge population of young people, and yet, as we mentioned one other time, what we think should be considered is the percentage of people. Not massive numbers, because of course our area right now is not young people, but there's a point in time when it possibly could be, and so we do commend you, and Mayor, you're kind of the verbal one on this sometimes in driving, and we appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you.
Is it possible to get copies of any of those things that were shown?
Sure.
today.
We can make a copy of the entire PowerPoint for you.
All right. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Thank you.
If the manager would, Mr. Vincent will get that to you. There you go. You got it right now.
Okay.
That's the whole kit and caboodle. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else like to be heard? All right. Thank you, everybody. It was a very, very important meeting, very significant, and very good job. Meeting's adjourned.